The silent struggles. Amara Blackwell was always the girl who felt the weight of silence around her. Deafness wasn't just something she had to live with. It was something that defined her world. Growing up in a small town where everyone could hear and talk, her inability to communicate like everyone else was both a gift and a curse. At school, she often found herself alone, the odd one out in a sea of laughter and chatter. She didn't have the comfort of knowing what was being said around her, but she could sense the subtle glances, the whispered words, and the quiet mockery. It was in the way people avoided her, in the way they looked at her when they thought she wasn't paying attention. Her dark skin made her stand out even more, an additional layer of difference that set her apart from the other students at Cornwall High School. The school was predominantly white, and Amara, despite her intelligence and the kindness she often offered, was an outsider. She had a few friends, but they were scattered, often too busy or too distant to offer her the support she needed when the bullying took its toll. The students who didn't understand her deafness would look at her as though she was something foreign. They didn't know how to deal with her silence, so they filled it with their own cruelty. At the heart of this cruelty was Kimberly O'Connor. She was the queen bee, the golden girl, and the undisputed leader of a tight-knit clique that had made Amara their target. Kimberly had a way of turning the smallest difference into something that could be ridiculed. And for years, her focus had been on Amara. It had started in middle school, when Amara had transferred into Cornwall. At first, it had been small things, whispers behind her back, people pretending they couldn't see her, ignoring her when she raised her hand. But as time went on, the insults grew sharper. They were no longer just words Amara couldn't hear, but feelings she could always feel. It was the way the girls in Kimberly's group would laugh at her, make her the punchline of every joke, and then leave her out of every group conversation, their voices growing louder when she passed by. The worst moments, though, were the ones that tore at her very sense of self-worth. Kimberly, always the orchestrator, had decided that one of Amara's most private spaces, the notebooks she carried everywhere, should be the next object of ridicule. Amara wasn't able to speak, so she wrote everything down. Every thought, every dream, every feeling that didn't make sense in her quiet world. Her notebooks were her sanctuary, where she could escape the chaos of school life, the cruelty, the isolation. She would scribble for hours, her fingers dancing on the pages as she captured the words that she couldn't say aloud. One afternoon, Amara had left her notebooks unattended for just a moment, her mind focused elsewhere, when Kimberly and her friends saw the opportunity to strike. They grabbed her notebooks without a word, flipping through the pages with exaggerated interest. Amara watched in helpless silence, her heart pounding in her chest as they laughed at her words, mocking the raw vulnerability in each line. She couldn't hear their laughter, but she could feel it. The cruel mockery in their eyes spoke louder than any words could have. Then, in a moment that felt like it stretched for eternity, Kimberly tore one of the pages out and ripped it into pieces. Slowly, deliberately, she scattered the pieces into the air, and the others followed suit, throwing the torn pages across the room like confetti. Amara stood there, her hands trembling, her stomach sinking. The words that had once been hers, that had once been her only way of speaking, were now just scraps scattered on the floor. It felt as if a part of her had been torn apart too. The silence, which had been a refuge, now felt like a prison, enclosing her in a bubble where no one could understand her pain. She felt the humiliation deeply, a quiet ache in her chest that wouldn't go away. She wanted to speak, to scream, to demand that they stop. But she couldn't. She could only watch as they laughed, the sound of it ringing in her ears like a cruel echo. The worst part was how she couldn't even defend herself. Every attempt to sign her anger, her hurt, was met with laughter. The cruelty seemed endless, and Amara could do nothing but retreat into herself, finding solace in the quiet corners of the school, away from their taunts. But there was one place where Amara could truly escape: the library. It was her sanctuary, her refuge from the world that constantly made her feel like she didn't belong. Surrounded by books, Amara could lose herself in stories, in worlds far away from the petty cruelty of her peers. In the pages of novels and poems, she found the freedom to dream, to imagine a life where she wasn't an outsider. It was there, one afternoon, when she was searching through a stack of old books, that she stumbled across something that would change everything. The book was a dusty old volume, hidden away in the back of the library, its cover worn and faded. Amara pulled it out of the shelf, intrigued by the title, The Lost Princess of Diamond Mines. Flipping through the pages, she found a story about a young girl from a far-off African kingdom, a girl whose life had been steeped in mystery. The princess had disappeared many years ago, and the kingdom's ruler, King Philip, had never stopped searching for her. The princess, it seemed, had vanished without a trace. She was said to be wearing a royal necklace, one that was unique to the royal family. The story told of a chance encounter with a man named Albert, an envoy from the kingdom, who had spotted a woman wearing the same necklace. The woman's face was concealed, but the necklace had been unmistakable. He had followed her, only to lose her in the crowded streets. The only clue he had was a bag with the logo of Cornell University. Amara's heart skipped a beat as she read those words. She couldn't explain it, but something in her gut told her that this story was connected to her. The necklace, the kingdom, the mention of Cornell University. It felt like a thread that tied her to something much bigger than herself. She couldn't make sense of it, but she couldn't ignore it either. Days went by, and the rumors about a princess searching for her lost identity began to swirl around school. Amara paid little attention, unsure of how it related to her. But then, one morning, as she was walking through the school hallways, she noticed something strange. The students who had once mocked her, including Kimberly, were now acting differently. They were no longer laughing or ignoring her. They were looking at her, some with curiosity, some with awe. They seemed to be examining her, as though trying to figure out who she was. And then she saw it. Kimberly, the girl who had tormented her for years, was holding a mirror, staring at her reflection. Her skin, once pale, was now darker, as if she had gone to great lengths to change it. The others were doing the same. They had tanned their skin, painted their faces, trying to appear like her. Amara's confusion deepened. What was going on? Why were they doing this? As she entered the classroom, she saw more strange behavior. The whispers that had once been directed at her were now directed toward one another. Kimberly's group was whispering in hushed tones, eyes flicking nervously toward Amara. It felt like the world had shifted overnight. Her tormentors were now the ones who seemed uneasy, trying to change themselves to look like her, to understand her. But Amara had no answers. She only had more questions. The strange events took an even stranger turn when, the next day, a man appeared at the school. Tall and imposing, he walked with the grace of someone who knew exactly where he was going. He had a presence about him that seemed to demand attention, even without speaking. The students watched him as he moved through the hallways, his eyes scanning the faces of the students. When he saw Amara, his expression changed. He stopped, his gaze fixing on her with an intensity that made her heart race. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Amara felt as though she were caught in a moment of recognition, though she didn't understand why. The man approached her, and before she could even sign a greeting, he asked in a low, confident voice, "Are you Amara Blackwell?" Her heart leaped in her chest as she nodded slowly. Something was happening, something she couldn't explain, but she knew it was about to change her life forever. The revelation of her lineage. The man who had asked about Amara Blackwell stood before her like someone who had known her all her life, though she had never seen him before. His presence was commanding yet calm, and there was an air of purpose about him that made her heart race. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but one question stood out above all the rest. How did he know her name? He was dressed sharply in a dark suit, his face chiseled, with a look that suggested both intelligence and mystery. Amara's eyes darted around the hallway, but no one else seemed to notice the peculiar encounter. Her classmates went about their business, as though this man's arrival was a normal part of the school day. But it wasn't normal. Something felt off, something intangible yet significant. She signed with her hands, asking slowly, "Who are you?" The man's gaze softened, though there was a flicker of intensity behind his eyes. He glanced at the door of the classroom where Amara was standing, then back at her. "Amara, I am Albert, an envoy from the kingdom of Zandara. I've been searching for you." The name Zandara struck something deep within Amara. Her heart skipped a beat, but she couldn't place why it felt so familiar. It was a name that felt tied to a past she couldn't remember, a place she had never been. She had heard rumors, whispers of a lost princess, a royal bloodline that had vanished, and suddenly, all the pieces clicked into place. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She shook her head, her hands trembling. I don't understand. What do you mean, searching for me?" Albert sighed deeply, his face filled with the weight of years spent searching. "I know this is hard to comprehend, but you are the lost princess of Zandara. Your heritage has been hidden, even from you, but it's time you knew the truth." Amara stood frozen in place, her hands hovering in the air, unable to form the words. The realization struck her like a thunderclap, sending her thoughts scattering in all directions. She couldn't hear the words, but she could read the sincerity in Albert's expression. The man before her wasn't lying. He believed what he was saying, and for reasons she couldn't fully explain, a part of her believed it too. She signed slowly, her hands trembling with the weight of what she was trying to comprehend. "But I don't remember anything. I was born here, in this town. My mother raised me. She never told me any of this." Albert nodded solemnly, his eyes showing a rare hint of sadness. "Your mother protected you. She kept the secret to ensure your safety. Your disappearance, your mother's journey to escape, and your adoption. These were all part of a plan to hide you from those who might want to use your heritage for their own gain." Amara's head swam with the sheer complexity of what he was saying. She had always known there was something unique about her, something that set her apart from the other kids at school, but she had never imagined it could be this. She had always felt a quiet strength inside her, a voice she could never hear but always seemed to understand. Could it be that this strength was connected to a royal bloodline? Albert continued, his voice soft but insistent. "Your father, King Philip, has spent years searching for you. His kingdom, Zandara, is one of the wealthiest and most powerful in Africa. It's known for its vast diamond mines, but it's also a place of ancient traditions, rich culture, and deep history. You were meant to inherit a throne, to lead, to restore the legacy of your family. But your mother, she feared for your life, so she made the painful decision to leave, to give you a chance at a life away from the dangers of royalty." Amara's thoughts were clouded, and a storm of emotions churned inside her. The sadness of never knowing her true identity, the anger of being kept in the dark for so long, the confusion of suddenly being told she was someone important. A princess. It all felt too surreal. Albert stepped closer, his voice low. "I've come to bring you back. Your kingdom needs you, Amara. There are people who have been searching for you, who believe in the prophecy of the lost princess. It's not just a story, it's a legacy. Zandara is waiting for you." The weight of his words hit her like a tidal wave. She felt as though her entire life had been a lie, that everything she had known, every struggle, every insult, every tear, had been part of some grand design she hadn't understood. But Amara's hands trembled as she signed the word she had to ask. "Why me? Why was I chosen?" Albert's eyes softened. "Because of the necklace, Amara. The royal necklace that was passed down through generations. It is a symbol of your bloodline, a gift from your ancestors. Your mother took it with her when she fled. She kept it hidden, but it is yours. The necklace will mark you as the true heir to the throne of Zandara." Amara's mind raced. A necklace. She had never seen such a thing in her life. The closest she had come to anything resembling royalty was a small locket her mother had given her when she was younger, a locket that her mother had insisted was just a family heirloom. But had it really been that simple? Was there more to her past, more to her history, than she had ever been told. The school bell rang, signaling the start of class, but Amara couldn't tear her gaze away from Albert. The world around her seemed to fade, and for the first time in her life, she felt as though she had a purpose, a calling. Albert continued, his voice soft, but filled with a quiet urgency. Amara, I know this is a lot to take in, but you need to understand, Zandura is in danger. There are people who would see your kingdom fall, who want to destroy everything your family has built. They've been looking for you because they know the prophecy, and they fear that you, as the rightful heir, will return to restore Zandura to its rightful place in the world. Amara's heart raced, a mix of fear and excitement coursing through her veins. She had no idea what was waiting for her in Zandura, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had just changed forever. No longer was she the girl who was mocked and ignored, the girl who struggled to be seen. Now she was something more. She was a princess, and the weight of her lineage had just been placed on her shoulders. She signed one last question, her hand slow but deliberate. What do I do now? Albert's expression grew serious, and he stepped closer, his voice barely above a whisper. Now, Amara, you must decide. Will you return to Zandura to claim your birthright? Or will you stay here, in the life you've always known, and let the world of Zandura fade into myth and memory? The silence between them stretched, and for the first time, Amara felt the enormity of the decision before her. Zandura was calling her, but could she leave everything she had ever known behind? Albert stood waiting, his eyes filled with both patience and expectation. The choice was hers, but one thing was clear: whatever she decided, her life would never be the same. The weight of a crown. Amara sat alone in the library for hours after Albert left her, her mind racing. She couldn't bring herself to focus on the usual books she found solace in. Every page, every sentence felt irrelevant compared to the revelation she had just received. A princess. She had heard the word before, in fairy tales and stories her mother told her when she was little, but it was always just that, a story. Never in a million years did she think it could be her reality. The school bell rang again, pulling Amara from her thoughts. She stared at her hands, the same hands that had once written her dreams in notebooks, the same hands that had carried her through a life of isolation and cruelty. Now those hands were being asked to carry something far heavier, a legacy. Her classmates, still pretending that nothing had changed, continued to pass her by as she sat frozen in the corner of the library. The whispers, the glances, they were all still there, but now they felt different. Kimberly's sudden change, the strange efforts to mimic Amara's skin tone. It was as if the whole school was teetering on the edge of a secret they were too scared to admit. The school day ended without any answers, leaving Amara with more questions than ever. As she walked home, the streets seemed quieter than usual. She felt the world closing in on her, as if the answers she sought were just out of reach, yet undeniably close. Her feet carried her home without any conscious direction, her mind too tangled in the chaos of what had just been thrust upon her. When she reached her front door, she found her mother sitting at the kitchen table, a tired expression on her face. There was something different in her eyes, something Amara had never seen before. "How was your day?" her mother asked softly, as though she already knew. Amara dropped her backpack onto the floor with a thud, her mind overwhelmed. She signed quickly, her hands trembling as she formed the words. "Mom, there's something I need to know. Albert came to school today. He says I'm the lost princess of Zandura. He says I'm the heir to the throne." Her mother didn't flinch, didn't show the shock Amara had expected. Instead, she stood slowly and walked over to her, as if preparing for this moment all her life. "Sit down, Amara," her mother said in a voice that was gentle yet firm. Amara obeyed, her hands shaking as she crossed them in her lap. Her mother sat next to her, taking a deep breath as if bracing for the weight of a confession long kept hidden. "Amara, there's so much I need to tell you," she began, her voice tinged with sadness. "Zandura is real. It's a kingdom far from here, and it is unlike anything you could ever imagine. But it is not just a place of wealth and power. It is a kingdom that is rich in culture and steeped in history, a history that is intertwined with your own. Amara's heart raced as she listened to her mother's words. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't some distant myth. This was real. Her mother continued, "Your father was King Philip of Zandara. He was a strong and wise ruler, beloved by his people. But there were enemies in his kingdom, enemies who saw your birth as a threat to their power. They tried to take you from us when you were just a baby, and it was only by the grace of God that I was able to escape with you. We fled, and we came here, to this small town, where we could be safe." Amara felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting, and she could no longer find her footing. Her father, the king of a powerful kingdom, had been taken from her, and she had never even known. All these years, she had thought she was just another girl, struggling to survive in a world that didn't understand her. She had never imagined that her bloodline carried with it such a weight, such responsibility. Her mother continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I raised you to be strong, Amara, to survive in a world that wouldn't accept you for who you are. I never wanted you to feel the weight of a crown. I wanted you to be free, to have a choice in your life. But now, with the arrival of Albert and the rumors of your heritage spreading, I can see that you can no longer run from who you are." Amara's hands shook as she signed her next question. "Why didn't you tell me? Why did you hide this from me?" Her mother took a deep breath, tears glistening in her eyes. "I didn't want you to grow up carrying the fear of being hunted. Zandara's enemies would have come for you if they knew who you truly were. I thought that if I kept you here, you would be safe. But now, it seems like the truth can't be hidden anymore. The kingdom is in turmoil, and you, Amara, are the only one who can restore balance." Amara leaned back in her chair, the weight of her mother's words pressing down on her. Could she truly be the one to restore balance to a kingdom she had never known? How could she even begin to understand a world so different from the one she had grown up in? But deep within her, something stirred, a quiet understanding that she couldn't deny. The truth had been hidden from her, but it was part of who she was, part of the strength she had always carried inside. The necklace Albert spoke of, the one her mother had kept hidden, was not just a piece of jewelry. It was a key to something far greater. It was a symbol of her lineage, of a legacy she had yet to uncover. Amara signed again, her hands more composed now. "What do I do? What is my role in all this?" Her mother's eyes softened, and she placed a hand gently on Amara's. "You are the princess, Amara. You are the rightful heir to the throne of Zandara. But more than that, you are the hope of a kingdom that has been waiting for you. You don't have to go if you don't want to, but know this. You are the key to restoring peace, to leading Zandara into a new era." Amara's thoughts swirled as her mother's words sank in. Her mother had sacrificed so much to protect her, and now she was being asked to take up the mantle that had been placed before her. The life she had known, the life of isolation and hardship, was not the end of her story. It had only been the beginning. And yet the idea of returning to a land so far away, of stepping into a world she had never known, was terrifying. She had no experience with leadership, no knowledge of the customs or the people of Zandara. How could she possibly live up to the expectations placed on her? But Amara knew deep down that her journey was inevitable. The kingdom needed her, and perhaps in some way, she had been preparing for this moment all her life. The strength she had built through years of adversity, the resilience forged in silence, was not weakness, it was her power. Her mother looked at her with a mixture of pride and fear. "Whatever you choose, I will support you. But know this, you are not alone. There are allies in Zandara who will help you. You just have to trust yourself." Amara looked out the window, her eyes lost in thought. The weight of her destiny was heavy, but there was a spark of determination deep within her. The path ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and dangers she could not yet comprehend. But for the first time in her life, She felt a sense of purpose. The crown was no longer just an abstract idea. It was a symbol of her strength, her resilience, and her future. She signed one final question, her fingers slow but firm. "How do I begin?" Her mother smiled, a tear slipping down her cheek. "You begin by accepting who you are. And from there, the rest will follow." The call to Zandera. The night after Amara's conversation with her mother, the weight of the decision she had to make pressed heavily on her chest. She lay in bed, staring up at the ceiling, the darkness surrounding her as her thoughts swirled. She had always lived in the shadows, her silence and her isolation keeping her apart from the world around her. But now, everything had changed. A new reality had come crashing into her life, one where she wasn't just a girl trying to fit in at school. She was the heir to a kingdom, the lost princess of Zandera. She had always felt like she didn't belong, like there was something more to her existence that she couldn't fully understand. But she never expected that more to be an ancient legacy tied to a powerful kingdom. Her mother's words echoed in her mind. "You are the hope of Zandera. You are the key to restoring peace." Amara was overwhelmed by it all. Zandera was a place she had only heard of in fleeting rumors and old stories, a land of vast diamond mines, rich culture, and a history that had been lost to her. It felt like another world, one that she could never fully embrace. Her whole life had been spent in this small town, isolated from everything and everyone. The thought of stepping into that other world, of leading a kingdom, filled her with both fear and uncertainty. Her mother had made it clear. This was her destiny. But destiny felt like a heavy burden to bear, one she was unsure she was ready for. She had never been trained to rule, never prepared to lead. How could someone like her, someone who had spent her life feeling alone and insignificant, be expected to step into the shoes of a queen? She spent the rest of the night in silence, not sleeping, but thinking. Could I do it? Could I actually lead a kingdom? The question repeated in her mind like a mantra, but she didn't have an answer. All she knew was that her life was no longer just her own. It belonged to something greater now. The next morning, her mother came to her with a sense of urgency, her face a mixture of pride and fear. "Amara," she began, her voice trembling, "I've arranged for you to meet with Albert again. You need to make a decision. The people of Zandera are waiting for you. They're calling for their princess to return, and the time is growing short." Amara nodded slowly, her stomach twisting with the realization that her life was no longer hers to control. The kingdom of Zandera was not just a far-off land. It was a place that needed her. But how could she leave everything behind? How could she abandon the only life she had ever known? Her mother placed a hand on her shoulder, her touch warm and comforting. "You don't have to go right now. You can take your time. But remember, this is your heritage, your birthright. The people of Zandera are waiting for you to lead them into a new future." Amara's mind raced as she stood up, heading toward the door. "What if I fail?" she asked quietly, her voice barely a whisper. Her mother smiled sadly, as if she had anticipated the question. "Failure is part of life. But you can't succeed unless you try. Zandera needs a ruler who will not shy away from responsibility, who will lead with strength and compassion. You have both." Amara took a deep breath, knowing that her decision was imminent. There was no turning back now. She had to choose whether to embrace her destiny or remain in the shadows, hiding from the responsibility that awaited her. That afternoon, Albert arrived at her house, his presence commanding but gentle. He was no longer the stranger who had appeared out of nowhere. Now, he felt like the messenger of something greater, something that demanded Amara's attention. She felt the gravity of the situation settle in as she saw him step into the living room, his expression serious but not unkind. "Amara," Albert said, his voice low and steady, "I know this is difficult, but you must understand, your kingdom is in crisis. There are factions within Zandera that are vying for control, seeking to dismantle the monarchy. Your presence is the only thing that can bring unity and restore order. The people of Zandera believe in the prophecy. They believe in you." Amara listened carefully, her heart pounding as she absorbed the magnitude of his words. Her presence could change the fate of an entire kingdom. It was too much to process all at once, but she knew that there was no turning back. She was being asked to step into a role that was both terrifying and exhilarating. Albert continued, "I've arranged for you to travel to Zandera within the next few days. We will make sure you are safe, but you must understand that your journey will not be easy. The enemies of your family are still watching, and they will stop at nothing to keep you from reclaiming your throne." The words hit Amara like a punch to the gut. She had spent her life feeling like an outsider, like an invisible girl who would never be seen for who she truly was. But now, she was being asked to become something far greater. The weight of leadership, the responsibility of a kingdom, was too much for her to carry alone. She felt small in the face of such overwhelming expectations. Albert noticed the doubt in her eyes and softened his tone. "Amara, I know this is overwhelming, but you are not alone. We will be with you every step of the way. You have allies, and there are those in Zandera who will help you take your rightful place as queen. The people believe in you." For the first time, Amara saw a glimpse of something beyond fear. She saw a glimmer of hope, a future where she wasn't just a girl struggling to survive, but a leader who could make a difference. The idea of leading Zandera was still daunting, but the possibility of restoring peace to her kingdom, of bringing hope to the people who had waited for so long, began to spark something deep inside her. She took a deep breath and sighed. "I'll go. I'll do it. But I don't know if I'm ready." Albert smiled, his expression warm. "You don't have to be ready, Amara. You will learn. And in time, you will grow into the ruler you are meant to be." In the days that followed, Amara began preparing for the journey that would take her to Zandera. Her mother helped her gather what little she would need, and Albert made the necessary arrangements for her departure. The reality of leaving her home, her school, and everything she had ever known was setting in, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. But as the day of departure drew near, Amara couldn't ignore the sense of purpose that was growing inside her. It was time. Time to step into the role that had been waiting for her all along. Time to face the challenges that would shape her into the queen Zandera needed. When the day arrived, Amara stood at the edge of the small town, gazing out at the world that had been her home. The people who had once mocked her, who had once turned their backs on her, would never know what she was about to become. She would leave behind her old life, her old self, and embrace the legacy that had been hidden from her for so long. Albert stood beside her, his presence a silent reminder that this was only the beginning of the journey ahead. With one last look at her past, Amara turned away from the town and toward the future. Zandera awaited her. The journey to Zandera. The day Amara boarded the plane that would take her away from everything she had ever known, she felt like an outsider in her own life. There had been so many moments of doubt, so many questions left unanswered, but there was no turning back now. The quiet girl who had once felt invisible in the halls of her school, the girl who had spent years buried under the weight of isolation, was now about to step into the heart of a kingdom, one that had been waiting for her return. Amara sat by the window, her eyes scanning the horizon as the plane ascended. Below her, the world she had known grew smaller and smaller, until it was nothing more than a distant memory. As the clouds surrounded her, she felt both free and confined. The unknown stretched out before her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being pulled into something far greater than herself. The flight was long, filled with restless hours where Amara's thoughts seemed to grow louder with every passing minute. She thought of her mother, who had sacrificed so much to keep her safe, and of the life she had left behind. The classmates who had tormented her, the endless days of loneliness. Now those memories seemed like they belonged to someone else. They were the past, and the past had no place in the future she was about to step into. As the plane descended toward the lush, unfamiliar landscape of Zandera, Amara's heart began to race. She had no idea what awaited her on the other side. No idea who she would be once she crossed that threshold. Would she be accepted as the princess? Would the people see her as the leader they had been waiting for, or would they question her right to rule? Could she live up to the legacy her mother had hidden from her for so long? The plane touched down with a soft jolt, and the world outside seemed to breathe in unison with her nervous anticipation. When the doors opened, the warm air of Zandera rushed in, carrying with it the scent of unfamiliar spices and the sounds of a language she did not yet understand. Amara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of her decision settle deeper within her chest. Albert stood beside her, his presence a steady anchor amidst the whirlwind of emotions swirling in her mind. "Welcome to Zandera," he said softly. "You are home." The journey from the airport to the capital city was filled with sights that Amara could hardly believe. The landscape was unlike anything she had ever seen. The vast, sprawling jungles that surrounded the city, the towering mountains in the distance, the vibrant markets filled with colors and sounds that seemed to pulse with life. It was a place of history, a place that had been waiting for her return. As they entered the city, Amara marveled at the mix of tradition and modernity. Tall, majestic buildings made of stone and marble stood alongside humble homes with thatched roofs, and people of all ages and backgrounds moved through the streets with purpose, their eyes glancing curiously at Amara as she passed by. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken expectation that she was the one they had been waiting for, the lost princess who had finally come home. Albert led her through the city, taking her to the royal palace at the heart of the kingdom. The palace was nothing like the mansions and estates she had seen in books. It was a sprawling complex, with towering walls and intricately designed archways that seemed to tell stories of the past. The grand entrance was guarded by soldiers in elaborate uniforms, and the scent of exotic flowers filled the air. It was both magnificent and intimidating. As they approached the entrance, Amara's heart began to race. This was it. This was where she would step into her role, not just as a visitor, but as the heir to a throne. She had never known this world, never imagined herself in a place like this, and yet it was here, waiting for her. "Amara," Albert said, his voice firm but reassuring, "this is your home now. The people are ready for you. But remember, this is just the beginning. You will need time to learn, to understand the kingdom and its people. But you are not alone. We are here to guide you." With those words, Amara stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the palace. The grand doors swung open, and the sight before her took her breath away. The palace's interior was a world of its own, richly decorated with tapestries and art that depicted the history of Zandera, the struggles and triumphs of her ancestors. The floors were polished marble, the walls adorned with intricate carvings that told the stories of past rulers, of victories and defeats, of peace and war. As she moved through the palace, she was greeted by courtiers and advisors, all of them bowing to her in respect. It was overwhelming, the attention, the respect, the formality of it all. She had never experienced anything like this in her life. Back home, she had been invisible. But here, in Zandera, she was the center of attention, the one they had been waiting for. The royal chamber was lavish, adorned with silks and gemstones that sparkled in the soft light. A grand canopy bed stood against one wall, with a throne beside it, a throne that would soon be hers. She could already see it in her mind's eye, the moment when she would sit in that throne, when she would assume her rightful place as queen. But as she gazed around the room, a knot of uncertainty tightened in her stomach. Was she truly ready for this? Could she lead a kingdom she had never known? The weight of her heritage pressed down on her, and the uncertainty she had been carrying with her seemed to grow heavier. Albert seemed to sense her unease and stepped closer. "Amara, I know this is overwhelming, but you don't have to do this alone. We have prepared everything for your arrival. The people of Zandera want you to lead, to restore the balance that has been lost. They believe in you." Amara nodded slowly, though her mind was still racing. The palace was magnificent, the people were eager for her to take her place, but she felt like a stranger in this world, a girl who had been thrust into a role she wasn't sure she was prepared for. As the sun began to set, casting a golden light across the palace, Amara knew that she could no longer hide from her destiny. This was her moment. The future of Zandara, of her people, depended on the decisions she would make in the coming days. But how could she possibly know what to do when everything she had known had been stripped away, and she was left with nothing but a crown she didn't know how to wear? The weight of the crown seemed to grow heavier with each passing minute, and yet, deep inside, Amara felt a flicker of something else, a quiet strength that had always been there, hidden beneath the surface. She had survived the cruelty of her school, the isolation of her childhood, and the uncertainty of her identity. And now she had to prove to herself that she could lead. Albert turned to her once more, his eyes filled with quiet encouragement. "You don't have to have all the answers right now, Amara. You just have to be willing to try." In that moment, Amara understood. This wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about having all the answers. It was about embracing the journey, trusting herself, and knowing that she had the strength to face whatever came her way. She had been born to this life, whether she was ready or not. And now, it was time to step into her role, not as the girl who had been lost and forgotten, but as the princess who would lead Zandara into a new era. With a deep breath, Amara turned to Albert and nodded. "I'm ready." And with that, her journey truly began. The weight of the crown. In the days that followed Amara's arrival at the royal palace, she was thrust into a whirlwind of unfamiliar faces, unfamiliar customs, and a world she could hardly comprehend. Every moment felt like a challenge, both exhilarating and overwhelming. She spent her days meeting with advisors, learning about the kingdom's history, and listening to tales of the Zandaran monarchy, stories passed down through generations of rulers. Yet despite the knowledge she gained, a deep sense of inadequacy lingered within her. How could she possibly lead these people? How could she be the queen they believed she was? The palace was a maze of corridors and chambers, each more grand and intricate than the last. Amara's footsteps echoed in the halls, a constant reminder that she was no longer the quiet, invisible girl she had once been. She was the princess now, the heir to the throne, the one who was expected to rule. The weight of that expectation felt like a physical burden on her shoulders, and with each passing day, it grew heavier. Despite her self-doubt, Amara threw herself into her training. Every lesson she received was a step closer to understanding what it meant to be a ruler, to understand the intricacies of governance, diplomacy, and the balance of power. But what her lessons couldn't teach her was how to overcome the fear that gripped her heart, the fear of failing the people who had waited so long for her return, the fear that she wasn't ready, that she would never be ready. Albert was there every step of the way, offering guidance and support, always reassuring her that she was not alone. His calm demeanor was a stabilizing force in her chaotic world. But even he couldn't answer the question that haunted her every night. Am I truly fit to be queen? It was on the third evening after her arrival that Amara found herself standing alone in the palace garden, staring up at the stars. The sky above Zandara was unlike anything she had ever seen, clear, vast, and brimming with 1,000 points of light. She had always been captivated by the night sky, but here, in this foreign land, it felt different. It felt like a reminder that she was no longer just a girl in a small town. She was the heir to a kingdom that spanned generations, a lineage that reached back to a time long forgotten. The garden was quiet, save for the rustle of leaves in the soft evening breeze. Amara walked slowly, her fingers brushing against the delicate petals of flowers she had never seen before. Her mind wandered to her mother, to the sacrifices she had made to protect her, to keep her safe from the dangers that had once threatened her. Her mother had given up so much, but now Amara understood that she, too, had to make sacrifices if she were to fulfill her destiny. But what about her own dreams? What about the life she had imagined for herself? It seemed so far away now, so distant, as if it had never been real. Could she truly walk away from everything she had ever known to embrace this life of power and responsibility? Could she give up her old self and become the Queen Zandara needed? Amara. The sound of her name startled her, and she turned to see Albert walking toward her, his expression thoughtful. "I know this is a lot," Albert said gently, "but I want you to remember something. The people of Zandera aren't just waiting for a queen. They're waiting for someone who will understand them, someone who will lead with compassion, someone who will give them hope. You don't have to have all the answers. You just have to be yourself." Amara lowered her gaze, trying to calm the storm of thoughts that swirled in her mind. "But what if I'm not enough? What if I fail them?" Albert stepped closer, his voice steady and unwavering. "Amara, your strength isn't in perfection. It's in your ability to learn, to adapt, to care for the people who are looking to you for guidance. You have already shown that strength, even when you didn't know it. That's why they believe in you." Amara looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I've never led anyone. I've never even led myself. How am I supposed to lead a kingdom?" Albert smiled, a warmth in his eyes that made Amara feel a little lighter. "You've led yourself through difficult times already. You've survived what others couldn't even begin to understand. You have wisdom that comes from lived experience, from empathy, and from strength. That is what will guide you." The next morning, Amara found herself standing at the edge of the royal balcony, gazing out at the bustling capital city below. Zandera was a place of immense beauty, a land that pulsed with energy and life. But it was also a kingdom on the brink of change. The royal bloodline, once revered, had been broken for so long, and now Amara was the key to restoring it, if she could rise to the challenge. She had spent her first few days in Zandera, learning the inner workings of the palace, meeting with key figures in the court, and understanding the delicate balance of power that had been in place for generations. But the more she learned, the more overwhelmed she became. The kingdom was at a crossroads, and she was expected to make decisions that could change the course of history. Albert had arranged for her to meet with the Council of Elders, a group of respected leaders who had guided Zandera for centuries. They had watched over the kingdom during the long absence of the royal family. And now, they were waiting for Amara to take her place as their ruler. As she entered the council chamber, she was greeted with respectful silence. The elders, each wearing robes of intricate design, sat at a long table, their faces wise and weathered by years of service. They were the ones who had kept the kingdom alive through the years of uncertainty, but now it was time for Amara to step forward and prove herself worthy of their trust. "Princess Amara," one of the elders spoke, his voice deep and commanding. "We have been waiting for you. The people of Zandera have waited for your return. It is time for the monarchy to be restored, and you, as the rightful heir, are the one to lead us into a new era." Amara felt a knot form in her stomach as the weight of their words settled over her. She had spent so much time running from this moment, so much time questioning whether she was ready. But now, as she stood before these wise leaders, there was no turning back. She had to be ready to take on the mantle of leadership, to guide her people with the strength and wisdom they so desperately needed. The council members looked at her expectantly, waiting for her to speak. Amara stood tall, her heart pounding in her chest. She didn't have all the answers. She wasn't perfect. But she knew one thing for sure. She couldn't let fear hold her back. This was her destiny, and she was ready to embrace it. "I may not have all the answers," she began, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that gripped her heart. "But I promise you this. I will listen to the people. I will learn, and I will lead with the strength and compassion that Zandera deserves. Together, we will restore balance and bring peace to this kingdom." For the first time since arriving in Zandera, Amara felt a sense of calm wash over her. She had made her first step. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, but it was real. And that was enough. The council nodded in approval, their eyes filled with respect. "We believe in you, Princess Amara," one elder said. "The people of Zandera believe in you. The road ahead will not be easy, but with you leading us, we know that our kingdom will thrive once again." As Amara left the council chamber, A feeling of quiet resolve settled within her. She had taken the first step toward becoming the Queen Xandera needed, and though the road ahead would be filled with challenges, she knew she was no longer just a girl lost in uncertainty. She was the heir to a kingdom, and with every decision she made, she would build a future worthy of her ancestors.